In this episode, I'm talking to holistic nutritionist Christa Orrechio on her 6 pillars of health to rewire your central nervous system out of fatigue, anxiety, depression, and stress mode back into health, energy, and healing mode. Enjoy. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Energy Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Ari Whitten, and today I have with me Christa Orecchio, who is a clinical and holistic nutritionist and founder of The Whole Journey. She helps people heal from the root cause using food as their medicine and a mind-body-spirit approach to health. Christa is a best-selling author, TV show host, and is super passionate about helping you heal your adrenals, thyroid, and nervous system in the most holistic way possible. So welcome to the show, Christa.
Thank you for having me, Ari. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, likewise. And on a personal note, I will say that it was such a pleasure getting together with you for lunch. I believe it was last week or the week before, and getting to talk so much geeky stuff with you around nutrition and health. And it was just an absolute pleasure.
The pleasure was mine. I mean, really, it's funny. We've lived so close to each other for so long and just got to know each other. So
yeah,
I'm
totally.
really that should be the first of many lunches we have.
I hope so. So I know that, one of the things we talked about is you have a new program that you've been developing called Adrenal Recode, and it really revolves around kind of the nervous system's role in illness and symptoms and stress hormones. And that one of the things that you say is that the majority of us are living off of stress hormones and we're not aware of it. So first of all, how do we know if that applies to us as individuals? And what exactly do you mean by living off of stress hormones?
Sure. So, well, you know that if that applies to you as an individual, if you've had long-standing problems with anxiety, that's really your telltale sign. If you've had long-standing problems with anxiety or insomnia, if you wake up like consistently between 1 and 4 a.m., almost like not able to go back to sleep, ready to start the day, or when you do wake up in the morning, it's earlier, like before the alarm, and you wake up with your heart pounding. These are all signs, but really kind of living in a state of fear, living in a state of overwhelm, that inability to relax, and sometimes it's that alternating anxiety and depression. Or it's like at the same time, you're tired and wired at the same time, but you can't let go even though you're just completely exhausted. You have no energy whatsoever, but yet you kind of feel that fried feeling.
Gotcha. So that's how we know if it applies to us. What does it mean to be living off of stress hormones? Like what hormones are you talking about in particular, and why are we, in your words, living off of them?
Yeah, so we're living in a state of stress. So it really comes down to within our central nervous system, within the autonomic nervous system, we have the sympathetic nervous system and we have the parasympathetic. And your sympathetic nervous system is that fight, flight, or freeze. You don't hear freeze a lot, but that's what a lot of us do under stress. And when we're in that state, we need that nervous system. We need a balance, a really healthy balance of both in order to thrive. But what happens is we're constantly clicking on this sympathetic nervous system unnecessarily. So we're completely overreacting to things as if we're in danger. And we get stuck in this way of responding and reacting. And we don't live in our parasympathetic nervous systems anymore. That's where rest, digest, and heal. That's where we do all of our digesting. That's when the body can recover, and that's when the body can heal. And we should spend the majority of our time, when we're not in danger, in the parasympathetic nervous system. Mm-hmm. So it could be, life can be a lot sometimes, right, Ari? It's like modern life. And so it could be the stresses we're under, but a lot of times it's things that happen to us that forced us into the sympathetic nervous system for a long period of time. So that could be something like childhood trauma. That could be, you could have gone through a divorce or a major breakup, or having recently had a baby, having a child, just the act of going through pregnancy and birth, especially if it's a traumatic birth, and becoming a new mother. Sometimes if then you start to add multiple kids to that, and just there's so much to balance. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean you've gone through a trauma, Or like we were talking at lunch, entrepreneurship can do this to you, right? It's like you're in the middle of a launch and there's just too much to do and not enough time to do it, that type of a thing. And so what happens is we lose our ability to toggle between these two nervous systems in a healthy way, and we get locked in the sympathetic nervous system. So now we're constantly releasing adrenaline, and then we move into releasing cortisol. And what happens is our cells lose their ability to be sensitized to insulin. So now energy can't get delivered, glucose can't get delivered into the cell, and now your thyroid can't make or burn energy. So you can't have an adrenal problem without having a thyroid problem and a nervous system problem and a brain problem, because really all four of them work so intimately together, and it's about healing these systems. And so we're stuck in this habit, we're stuck in this pattern. And I spent a decade in private practice, and I have this one client story that was like a life's defining moment for me, where I really got this. And I used to run a ton of neurotransmitter panels, where I'm looking at the metabolites of the neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers in the brain, and I'm looking at those in urine to see, okay, what's going on with this person's system with their inhibitory neurotransmitters, are the ones that make us feel calm and help us manage stress and help us sleep, versus the excitatory ones that, we get anxiety, we get inflammation, we start to get brain trouble. And I looked at this woman's panel, and it looked like she was in like utter crisis. And I had known her for 4 months at that point, and we weren't getting progress, but her life was fine. She was happy in her life. And I just said, what happened? What's going on? Is there something you didn't share with me? And she had a lot of childhood trauma and sexual abuse that she had never shared with anyone. And it was like, that's an extreme example, but to me, it was like, wow, people are getting locked into this state and they're not getting out of it. Mm-hmm. So you have to get out of that state in a physical way, and then also in an emotional way. Yeah.
I want to talk about the concept of adrenal fatigue briefly. This is something you and I chatted a bit about at lunch. You know that I'm not a proponent of the adrenal fatigue theory and sort of the traditional model of the 3 phases of adrenal, like chronic stress wears out the adrenals. And that, sort of results in low cortisol, which results in these symptoms of, fatigue and insomnia and depression and anxiety and a variety of others. I don't think the evidence supports that. But I know that your take on this, on adrenal health and how it ties into neurotransmitter health, central nervous system health, thyroid health, all these other layers to the story that you're talking about, is quite a bit more complex than just saying chronic stress wears out the adrenals, then you get low cortisol, that causes your problems. So, and also it seems to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me that you are not really saying that most people have low cortisol necessarily, but in some cases people have high cortisol. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, and I agree with you that, the term adrenal fatigue is like a gross oversimplification of what's happening. And the adrenal's role in this is it's a circadian rhythm problem, right? Like we secrete certain amount of cortisol to get us up and get us going for the day, and lower cortisol so that we can sleep. And so adrenal problems, or being in stress too much, you start to go all wild fluctuations because, right, I mean, if you have high cortisol, then your blood sugar, you can't regulate your blood sugar. And so the two of these are working in tandem. And so, it's a circadian rhythm issue, and it's just a regulation. You can't secrete the right amount of cortisol at the right time, basically.
Got it. So we're living off stress hormones. Many of us have these wild fluctuations of stress hormones. We have an inability to toggle between the stressed out, stress response, sympathetic nervous system, getting back into rest, digest, heal, parasympathetic mode. Mm-hmm. How did we get this way? What's going on in the modern world that made this situation so common?
Yeah, well, outside of life being a lot like we just talked about, from parenting to single parenting to overwork to just general stress. I mean, I definitely want to throw technology into the mix. I mean, that deserves a little bit of the blame, right? They say that we light up dopamine in our brain every time, I got 5 texts or 20 Slack messages or emails, right? You actually light up dopamine in the brain, which is part and parcel, constantly activating that reward center, and dopamine can get us in there. Like, we're all really overstimulated, and we become addicted to that feeling of being overstimulated. Just ask a teenager when you take away their phone for a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that happens, but also a lot of us, and especially if we're busy, what do? Like, we go for quick fixes. So we over rely on coffee, and we want to calm down at night. So we over rely on wine or sugar and those types of things. And we let exercise fall to the wayside. So the things that keep us in balance and can normally moderate these hormones, like, we don't anymore, because we are convenience oriented and we let our diets slip. And then all of a sudden, now you have this compromised body, because whenever you're in that parasympathetic nervous system, your body's job is just to keep you alive and keep you out of danger. Like, you are not going to be digesting your food. Your blood is going to be shunted away from the digestive system to the limbs, right? You have to be on high alert. So whatever it is that you're eating is going to sit like a rock in your stomach. You're not going to digest it, even if it's healthy food. And 9 times out of 10, when you're in this stressful state, it's probably not going to be healthy food. And so there's just like a culmination of the perfect storm that gets us this way. And then it's like a whirlpool. Then we're stuck in it and we're living in it. And now people say, oh yeah, they think that's who they are. That's their new normal. Oh, I get hangry. Like, if I don't have like enough food, so they carry food with them, or I'm just a night owl now, right? Or I have a short fuse. Don't piss me off, type of a thing. And people think that's who they are, and that's going to be their normal, and they're just going to live like that forever. But that, this was so transformative in my life when I thought, right? Because you end up liking yourself better. You have a completely different experience of life. You have different relationships. You do different things with your time. And so I really want to drive home the point that this is in a stress adaptive state of your biochemistry, but it's not who you are. And physiologically, when we're stuck in this state for too long, we can't convert our food into fuel, and we have no resilience to stress. So there's so many people out there that feel like, not one more thing, one more thing and I'm going to snap. And the same thing is happening inside of the body, because, we have in our liver and in our muscles, we store reserves, we store glycogen. So when we don't have food, or the meal's not there, or we're in a state of stress, the body can then release energy from the liver, from the muscles, that's stored energy, and it can lock out that excessive cortisol response. And so when you're in this state, you don't have any reserves. The liver can store something like 400 grams, and the muscles 12 to 1400 grams, and that's burned out, and it's not replaced, it's burned out. So you really physiologically have no reserves, and then you emotionally have no reserves. And that just makes for a life where you're living in fear and constantly on edge. Yeah,
absolutely. So there's several other layers to this story that you mentioned in passing before, with the thyroid, the central nervous system, the brain, the neurotransmitters. Kind of take me through your sort of model of how this plays out. And what's actually like happening in the brain and the nervous system, because that seems to be kind of a focus of the paradigm, is the brain and the nervous system and the central nervous system need to be rewired in a different state. So kind of take me through what this process of, kind of this whole process of cellular dysfunction and nervous system dysfunction looks like. How does it start, and what does the process look like?
So let's say if we start with hormonal balance happening in the brain, and we go back to these neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers in the brain, we have our primary inhibitory neurotransmitter is called GABA. I'm sure you know all about it, and you've talked all about it, but its primary job is to neutralize adrenaline. And so like anything else, if we continue to overwork it, it will get depleted. And in many people in this state, their GABA is really low, and their lab work, I know you're not a huge fan of these neurotransmitter tests, but their lab work can show that that's happening. And then there's this domino effect, and then serotonin starts to become low, another feel-good inhibitory neurotransmitter. And then we start driving up the inflammatory process. See, because what's happening is if you are producing too much cortisol, you are in a state of inflammation, and the body produces cortisol in order to buffer inflammation. So we can start to see this when we look at glutamate, an excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain, when that's getting too high, and that gets higher and higher, we start to get cell death, and now we're having cognitive issues, right? All of a sudden our memory and our brain's foggy, and those types of things are happening. And it's like we come down this cascade. So hormonal balance begins in the brain, and your pituitary gland is responsible for the control over your thyroid. So it's this cascade that starts to come down, which is why I'm not a fan, and we're right on the same page here with bioidentical hormone therapy. You're treating something all the way at the end so downstream. Oh, you're low in this, take this, here, low testosterone, take testosterone, high this, take that. And it's a Band-Aid approach that can drive up other pathways in the way you don't want them to. So really all of hormonal balance begins in the brain, but when you are lit up like this for such a long period of time, you're supposed to only be in a stress adaptive state. So the longer you're in this state, the more you're getting damage to basically the electrical insulator of your nerve cells, which is called your myelin sheath. This leaves you susceptible for neurological issues and disease, and for pathogens and things like that to come in and to invade. And so what we have to do is you have to address all four. So you have to basically stop the adrenals from overproducing cortisol when it's not time for cortisol, right? So we can regulate rhythms. And then you have to be able to get energy into the cell. You have to get oxygen, glucose, and thyroid hormone that has to be present in your cells in order to make energy. And you know all this because your nickname is the mitochondria man. And so we've got to be able to have those in our cell, but it's not enough to just have them. We have to then kind of stoke the fire, right? So that we can then once again make energy and and the more your body's making energy, the more it feels safe, the more you can shut off the sympathetic nervous system, live in the parasympathetic nervous system. But then you also have to repair the collateral damage that's been done to the myelin sheath if you want to make this your new normal. Like you think about a damaged myelin sheath is like electrical tape, and you've taken sandpaper to that electrical tape and it's all frayed and fried. Hey, you're not experiencing trauma or stress anymore, but the damage is there. So we have to go in and soothe it and heal it and calm it to it's like paving potholes, right? On a road that's been over-traveled on, so to speak. So you're working all four, and that's the only way to really move into a new, let's say, whirlpool. And that's the thing, it's hard in the beginning because a whirlpool's got a mind of its own and it's flowing on its own. So you have to constantly interrupt the pattern. I want to talk next about our 6-pillar strategy that's going to interrupt this pattern and get you where you want to go. But it's going to require vigilance, but then ultimately the healing happens and the whirlpool reverses on its own in the right direction. And it's normal and natural for you to live in your parasympathetic nervous system, to convert your food into fuel, to make energy, and to really live a completely different life. I mean, we're talking about the trajectory of 2 completely different existences here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we are disrupting neurotransmitters in the brain, we are disrupting hormones, and we have a deficit in our ability to drive nutrients and oxygen into the cell where it can be made into energy.
Yes, as well as a deficit in key micronutrients and key vitamins, minerals, and trace minerals that being in this state for too long just starts to deplete them from the body.
Okay. So so that paradigm is basically the fundamental sort of driver of most chronic disease from your perspective, correct? Or is it more like a specific kind of symptoms and syndromes?
It's more for the symptoms that I've mentioned. I've been in microbiome rejuvenation for a really long time, so you can't discount having heavy pathogenic exposure. So we're kind of talking about different paths up the same mountain.
Gotcha.
I'm not going to say it's the be all end all, because if you're coming and you have outrageous SIBO and you've taken 30 rounds of antibiotics, then this is going to be the next step after you rejuvenate your microbiome and re-educate your immune system.
Excellent. Okay. So from here, understanding these sort of layers of dysfunction result in those symptoms that you've mentioned. Mm-hmm. What does the path look like from your model as far as fixing this and interrupting that whirlpool, so to speak, and rewiring somebody's central nervous system into a different mode?
Yeah, so we have 6 pillars, if you will, that go through and be able to do this. And the first is to use synergistic foods that support all 4 systems, that replace the nutrient deficiencies, the micronutrients, but they are also metabolic foods, which means simply they're just easy to digest. So you're giving the body easy to digest foods in the right combinations so that the body once again can get the food into the cell without it having to work for it. Like you're not going to be giving your body foods that it has to be able to convert into other forms of energy to be able to use. So that's going to be really important. And so we're going to be looking at increasing, just in terms of micronutrients, you've got to increase a lot of your trace minerals that are just zapped. And so, increasing the amount of salt. So many people are in this situation are really going to be craving salt anyway. So using Himalayan pink salt and Celtic sea salt is going to be really helpful, getting your trace minerals back. Magnesium is crucial for the liver and the thyroid, and the body can't produce glutathione, which is the master antioxidant in the liver, if it doesn't have enough magnesium. Vitamin B1, the thyroid needs more of that. It's so involved in cellular energy and in the Krebs cycle. And so you really want to make sure you're focusing on foods that are metabolic, easy to digest, and we just want to constantly interrupt that pattern. And then food frequency is going to be really important because, again, you don't have enough glycogen reserves, so you have to do for the body what right now in this state it's unable to do for itself, which is you need to regulate blood sugar and just give it food it can use. And so having food frequency and eating more often, you'll be able to constantly interrupt the stress pattern. Okay,
so that's number 1 and 2, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a couple questions digging into this a bit more. Let's go back to number 1, which is synergistic foods, sort of metabolic healing foods.
Yeah.
Can you give a couple specific examples of foods that fit that category?
Yeah, so it's foods, but it's also the combination of foods. And so a lot of people probably aren't going to like this, but organ meats are really a very metabolic food, more so than muscle meats. I'm not a fan of them. I take the pills instead of eating them, but you can get fancy and start to mix them into with other meats. And so for those who are eating muscle meat, like they could mix in organ meat with that, or we're having them have metabolic proteins, and so egg yolks and not the whites because of sensitivities. Shellfish is more of metabolic, low-fat white fish. If you're going to have, anytime you're going to have meat like beef or bison, like you're always going to have it with a little bit of broth or collagen, because the combination of those 2 proteins and adding in the collagen or the broth is going to allow your body to use those wonderful nutrients that are going to be in the grass-fed beef. It's going to allow your body to actually use it instead of trying to work to be able to use it. So that's like in terms of meats. And then we're using vegetables that are easier, and you and I talked about this at lunch, like we're getting rid of that fear of carbs. Like in a lot of ways, this is a ketogenic recovery program, because you're going to force your body to overproduce stress hormones if 70% of your calories are coming from fat, or even sometimes if 50% of your calories are coming from fat. You're going to force what you don't want is for your body to not run off of glucose, but to run. Right, you don't necessarily want your body to be running off of fat. And so we really want people to be able to use fruit and root vegetables strategically for energy. And these are the healing foods when you combine them with protein and you combine them with fat, that are going to be able to get our reaction to then get glucose into the cell. That's the antidote to stress is sugar. And we all know that because we've got a crazy sugar addiction problem in the US. I used to eat Sour Patch Kids for lunch way back in the day, so I know that. And so it's like, no, let's solve that body's need for sugar by giving it healthy, supportive, micronutrient dense fruit and root vegetables. And so combining them in the right way. All of my other programs don't include dairy because so much of them are for the immune system and the gut, but using really high quality dairy and things like raw milk, that's the perfect blend of proteins, carbs, and fats to shut off the nervous system response, to feed the thyroid without the thyroid having to work for it at all, loaded with the amino acids that you need. And so, I'm a fan of it for this purpose.
Gotcha. Okay. So I have a barrage of questions for you to go into here. But let's start with, I think, probably the most controversial element in what you said, which is that we're now living in a dietary sort of trend where everybody's saying the opposite of what you said, in the sense that everybody's saying, hey, you don't want to be a carb burner or a sugar burner, you want to be a fat burner. And so you need to get the carbs out of your diet, eat a low carb, high fat diet, or a keto diet, or there's even people saying a zero carb diet. So we want to be running on only fat. And there's even people who kind of invoke a similar sort of logic, and they say, well, that eliminates the sort of blood sugar surges that you would get if you consume a carb-based diet. And to be clear, I'm acting as an impartial questioner here to try to just, devil's advocate, so to speak. I'm not saying I agree with the keto people or the carnivore diet people by any means, but I do want to pose that question to you so that you can sort of take on why are you not one of these people saying get the carbs out of your diet and you want to be a fat burner instead of a sugar burner? You're saying you want to be a carb burner. Why is that?
Yeah, I like the idea of slowing the release of glucose throughout your system through using fat, strategically in that way. And there are some people where they can go on a ketogenic diet and they can heal and they can lose weight for 3 weeks to maybe a couple of months. But if you keep your body, and that's where it can be helpful, but if you keep your body in that state for too long, well, first of all, you're challenging your gallbladder because it's a lot of fat, and gallbladder's probably going to start having trouble producing bile. And we've had a lot of people with gallbladder problems from eating this way for an extended period of time. So I think that there's no one right dietary theory. It's like, what are you using now and what are you using to heal? And if you're going to be running off of fat, which you can, but that is not the body's preferred source of fuel. And if you're going to be doing that an extended period of time, it's going to stress the body. It's going to put you in a catabolic state where you have to break down tissue to continue that. And I mean, you can see it with people who have, I had this one guy, he's like, I've been in ketosis for 3 years. I mean, they start to lose the minerals in their teeth, and they start to have chronic halitosis, and it puts us in this state of breakdown that we don't need to be in, and then we have to recover from that. So I think that if you're under the care of a practitioner, you're using the ketogenic diet, therapeutically to heal, and you're working specifically, that's fine. But I don't think it's a way of life.
Yeah. Okay. So sticking with nutrition a little bit more before we go on, regarding the glycogen stores thing, and kind of that most people don't have significant enough reserves. What about sort of the people who are extremely overweight and who are, generally speaking, chronically overeating relative to how much they're burning each day, and are essentially in a caloric surplus, and I think most would argue are chronically full in terms of their glycogen reserves. Is that, how do you sort of differentiate that with the kind of person that you're talking about? Is it?
I wouldn't say necessarily their glycogen reserves are full, because they're probably eating the kinds of foods that they can't create storage from. And so just to be clear, our program, you're not eating more, so you're not necessarily eating more calories, you're eating the right types of calories, the right macronutrients, the right combination of proteins, carbs, and fats to shut off the stress response. And so someone coming in who's overweight and having too many calories they'll be scaling back their calories. They'll probably lose weight fairly quickly, and especially from regulating your blood sugar, because we know that the body stores fat when you have too much cortisol going on for too long. And then there's the opposite point that you said is we've got a lot of people that they say, I don't get it. I'm stressed all the time. I don't really eat that much, and I exercise. And so it kind of goes back to the beginning of, do we believe in adrenal fatigue? Like, this really just comes back to balance. It's like, give the body what it needs to convert food into fuel and to burn it efficiently. And then that will create an efficient metabolism, right? The thyroid's the furnace and the thermostat of the human body. We create this efficient metabolism, and then weight works itself out on its own. And then efficient glycogen stores are reserved again.
Gotcha. Okay, so one more question here before we go on. With regards to food frequency, it sounds like you're an advocate of eating a little bit more on the frequent side, because people have blood sugar, have trouble regulating blood sugar levels in between meals, may go hypoglycemic and have their energy levels drop and brain function drop and that sort of thing, and then kind of have to have a stress hormone surge and that sort of thing. With that in mind, coming from that paradigm, what is your perception of the very popular trend of intermittent fasting now, of people having one meal a day or doing prolonged fasting of various kinds?
It really depends on the state of their nervous system. If you have anxiety and that you're the type of person who struggles with anxiety and insomnia, like, that's not going to be great for you. But if you are already resourced and your nervous system's fine, and you can intermittent fast and you can sleep at night and still have energy, and you're not locked in that state of fear and overwhelm, then kind of go back to the same thing as ketogenic. I don't think I would do it as a lifestyle, because that could start to cause its own issue. But it's like we're a living, breathing organism, right? And like, life happens and all of these different events happen that shift our hormones and shift our perception and our story. And so I think we have to be open to changing as we go.
Okay.
But intermittent fasting is not going to work for the person that we're trying to help with the Adrenal Recode.
Got it. So, so number 2 is food frequency to regulate blood sugar. Is there, before we go on to number 3, is there anything else you want to mention on that point?
I think I do, Ari, because somebody coming into this that is coming off of intermittent fasting, or they're coming off of a ketogenic diet, or if you have to work with your own body. And so that's where we're working with a team of 5 clinicians to help people. You can't go from eating once or twice a day to eating 6 times a day, because you will gain a lot of weight quickly. You can't go from eating no fruit or root vegetables, which that's pretty much, our next pillar, which we talked about, but you can't go from not eating any to then having them with every meal and not gain weight. So it's meeting people where they are. It's like wherever you're eating now, 1 or 2 meals a day, just increase it by 1. And I'm not talking about increasing the amount of food you're eating. It's just spacing it out. Like, so smaller meals more frequently. And then the same thing, if you've come from not eating any fruits and, you've got that, then you're going to start off with 1/8 of a cup with breakfast and see how that works for you. And because, again, you have to work, and you've got to sensitize your cells once again to these foods so that they can use them instead of just convert them right to fat.
Yeah, gotcha. So fruit and root sugar. Why fruit and roots? So in this, at this point, we're talking carbohydrate dominant foods. Why fruit and root vegetables as opposed to legumes or whole grains and that sort of thing?
Well, just because they're easier to digest. So someone who's been in this state for a while, the more you secrete cortisol, the more you can thin the lining of your gut, and the less you've been really digesting. And so I like legumes and I like gluten-free grains. I'm kind of on the fringe with that, but they have...
I'm with you on that, by the way.
I remember from lunch. So, and I appreciate that. It's like, it's just making healthier foods, and they'll be able to, in the Adrenal Recode, they'll be able to add some of those foods in once they get a certain level of healing. But they have some anti-nutrients called lectins or phytic acid, and it's just that it goes back to just, let's make this as easy as possible. Here, you don't have to do any work, just take this food and use it. And then when you get a little strength and you get a little resilience, it's like, here, you have to do a little converting, you have to, do a little work to get the nutrients out of this food, but you're stronger now and your body can do it, no problem. And so that's when you can start to add those foods back in. And for us, it takes, people come into our program and they take a questionnaire and they'll be put in one of two tiers based upon the severity of what's going on in their nervous system. And the second tier, they're going to have to wait a while before they can add those foods in, because they have to ascertain a certain level of healing. But then the first tier is going to be able to handle those foods in moderation. So it's all just depends on your current state of health.
Excellent. So within the category of fruit and roots, do you have any particular recommendations on specific types of fruits and or root vegetables that you find extremely beneficial?
Yeah, well, he's gonna love sweet potatoes, and for this, I like white potatoes. We put the resistant starches like cassava. Those are gonna be, you're gonna add them in a little bit later. In terms of fruit, a lot of the tropical fruits are really going to do the trick, and that is because they do have a little bit of a higher sugar content. And so we're talking things like pineapple and mango and papaya, full of enzymes, also really easy for the body to digest. Grapes, peeled pears and apples, because you're going to want to take off the skin just for easier digestibility and have them cooked. And so those are kind of the fruits that you're going to focus on, and grapes and melon, and we have some structure for food combining there. We don't combine fruit and roots together, so you can choose what your carbohydrate's going to be at that particular meal.
Mm-hmm. Got it. What is next? What's pillar number 4?
Well, pillar number 4, and we had a brief chat about this, is the targeted use of saturated fat to protect the nervous system. So we know that we need vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin D, and vitamin K to protect and support our nervous system. But, these vitamins do a whole host of things for the rest of the body as well. And so when we're in this, we can call it an unstable state, because when we're talking about fats, when you're healing something like this, you're going to want 50% of your fats to come from a saturated source. And so it's not that you're eating more fat, but you're just working, and then 45% are going to come from a monounsaturated, like avocado and olive oil, and only 5% from the polyunsaturated, because those can be the ones that can drive up the inflammation process the most, because they're the most unstable of the fats. So it's not that they're bad. When I'm saying a polyunsaturated fat, like almonds, right? When you're talking about nuts and seeds, it's not that they're bad. As we were talking and you said, well, there's endless studies about the health benefits of nuts and seeds, and there are. Inherently, they're healthy foods, but just the nature of the long chain molecule not having hydrogen attached to it on all sides leaves it unstable, right? This is why we want to put nuts and seeds in the refrigerator in an airtight container, because they're sensitive to light, heat, and air. And so the saturated fats are not the healthy, high, top quality saturated fats, like the good animal fats and butter and ghee and coconut oil. Those are going to help create more stability within the body as you're going through your healing process. And so the right amount and structure of fat is really important through healing. So it's like the right macro ratio of fat, and then also the right combination of the fat that you're eating.
Gotcha. So you're in an interesting territory here with regards to your views on some food groups and macronutrients. And you're a little bit in no man's land. Yeah. to some extent, because
that's how my career has gone, to be honest.
So what I mean by that is, in general, the people who are advocates of lots of saturated fat consumption are generally low carb, keto advocates, that sort of crowd, and they're promoting, the idea that consuming lots of saturated fats is really good for you. And then those people are generally, they would not agree with you that people should be carb burners and people are not getting enough carbs, and that people should be prioritizing fruits and root vegetables and consuming carbs frequently to avoid stress responses. They would not agree with you on any of those things. And then you have the sort of, some other crowds that might agree with you on the carb burner thing, like let's say a lot of the vegan diet gurus, but who would vehemently disagree with you about consuming lots of saturated fat. So you're kind of in a little bit of no man's land, but the person that is closest to you of all the different diet gurus is Ray Peat. And it sounds like you've been maybe influenced a little bit by his mode of thinking. And there's lots of layers of good stuff there. Yeah. But I'm curious, and first of all, am I correct that you have been influenced?
Yes. About 5 years ago, I really got into Ray Peat's work, and I took a lot of powerful influence and started using that in my practice, started using it for myself. But I just want to touch back with you for a second on the saturated fat. Like, so to be clear, like we're not, it's all within reason. So it's within balance. So a lot of people, they might not even end up be eating more saturated fat than they were eating before, right? It's just manipulating the ratio.
Gotcha.
We don't realize it. Like if you're going to eat something, like if you're going to make a steak, right, and you're going to add more fat to that, that's going to be too much saturated fat if you're going to cook that steak in butter. So I'm not advocating an overabundance of saturated fat, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. So this is just my own curiosity on this point, with regards to Ray Peat. Ray Peat, I think, from my perspective, this is my judgment on, being very familiar with what he teaches myself.
Yeah.
I definitely think there's layers of good stuff there. There's also some layers that to me just appear wildly out of connection with the existing body of evidence. And I'll give you a couple examples just to see, I'm curious whether you agree or don't agree with his take on things. One thing he's an advocate of is sterilizing the gut. So like having a sterile microbiome, like he will cite research, for example, in rats, where they showed that sterilizing the microbiome through use of antibiotics to essentially kill everything in the microbiome was associated with this or that benefit. And so he'll use that as an example to say sterile microbiomes are better than having a microbiome full of lots of a diversity of organisms. Like I think pretty much every microbiome scientist would agree with at this point.
That's like wholly disproven, like time and time again. Yeah. So just kind of like how we talked about, when we talked about the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, when we had lunch, it's just like, what I love is how they can put together just myriad of dietary theories. And there's so many there's no one right one out there, but there's pearls of wisdom from each one. And that's why I loved private practice. It's like, oh, I can take this from that dietary, this one, that one, this one, and put this together in such a unique way that helps this individual person. Right. And so I've taken 15,000 people through microbiome rejuvenation, and I will tell you that is wholly wrong.
Well, that's exactly why I brought that up, is because I know your background in specializing in the microbiome, so I figured there must be no chance that you could possibly agree with that.
No,
which I'm glad to hear is the case. But a couple other examples. One is he opposes consumption of greens, so like green leafy vegetables.
Yeah.
He does not advocate, and he in general advises avoiding fiber. So like he'll advise consuming orange juice, but no pulp, like only the juice of the orange without any pulp.
That depends. And so first of all, I'm not a fan of not eating greens. And so they are loaded with micronutrients, and his whole take on that, I don't agree with. I don't actually know if there's any tangible research on it where he says that they have their own inherent pesticide factory that they grow within to keep invaders from eating them. So then we eat that, but we know we feel better. We know the micronutrients, we know the studies are there, right? But it's within moderation for me, for oxalates, right? I don't want you drinking 32 ounces of green juice every day. And so even healthy food within the right balance and moderation. And I'm sorry, what was right after greens? What was it? The other example,
what was that?
The orange juice instead. So my take on that is not a Ray Peat's take. It's just what amount of fiber can a person handle? Because now I'm going back to putting on my microbiome rejuvenation hat, and the people that were coming to me with SIBO and parasitic infections and multiple autoimmune disorders, you know, they actually, their body doesn't know what to do with that fiber. And if you have a microbiome that you have too many different pathogens driving, which most people with microbiome imbalance do. Let's say they're flipped, like 80% bad pathogens, 20% good, and then you start feeding it with fiber and prebiotics, like you're not sure what you're feeding in there. So we suspend most additional fibers, right? We suspend most additional fibers until we understand that we have now reseeded the gut and we understand the diversity in there and we know what we're feeding, instead of just throwing lighter fluid on like something haphazard, right? So it's not that I agree or disagree with Ray Peat in that sense. It's really comes down to what are you digesting and how.
Yeah, and to be clear, I actually agree with your point, but that isn't his take on it. He doesn't present a nuanced version of that where it's like, don't do fiber if your microbiome is if you have dysbiosis, and let's assess that, and then, you know, up your fiber if you have a good microbiome. His take is like more of a blanket sort of,
don't do it
in general. And it's maybe, you know, hardcore Ray Peat advocates would maybe accuse me of slightly misrepresenting this, but I'd say overall, most people who study Ray Peat come away with the conclusion that greens are bad, essentially, like period. And that
think for yourself.
In general, one should avoid fiber and avoid orange juice, orange fruit fiber, and greens, you know, fiber from greens and fiber from legumes and things like that. And I think, you know, to me, this is just wildly out of congruence with the overall body of evidence. But I do agree with certainly your exception to the rule that if somebody has dysbiosis, certainly feeding it with lots of, even the stuff that has good evidence for it, some of the prebiotic fibers can create problems in those people, 100%.
Well, not to get too far into digestive health, but it's like, whenever you're healing the gut, you have to slash the inflammatory process. You've got to suspend it. And then you have to interrupt pathogen production, right? You have to interrupt the way these pathogens communicate so that they can no longer communicate. They can no longer replicate. They can't share their genetic code anymore. And so you interfere with that step if you are haphazardly using fiber and prebiotics, right? Yeah. And then once you've got that under control, that's when you would reseed with really specific strains of probiotics, right? Because you can mess up putting probiotics in too early as well. And so that's when you know what you're working with and you can reseed with probiotics. And then you can start to add in prebiotics, probiotics, optimize hydrochloric acid, and, you know, really kind of get the body working again on its own and not tend to the garden, so to speak.
I'm with you. Final Ray Peat question.
Yeah. Sugar. I think you know more about Ray Peat than I do, to be honest. I didn't study him.
Yeah, I many years ago, I went through a Ray Peat phase. You know, I've been through a lot of phases. You know, it's funny to me that keto is popular now. I was doing keto when I was 17 years old, nearly 20 years ago. And before anybody knew what keto was. And so.
You were raised in a holistic household though, right?
I was also, you know, I started when I was 14 years old. My older brother was a personal trainer and bodybuilder. And so then I had a very obsessive personality. So whenever I got interested in something, it's sort of all I wanted to do. Wow. And, you know, well, let's just say I've been interested in nutrition and health for 20 some years now. And it's been a long time. And I have a bit of an extreme personality too. So I've been on lots of very extreme diets of chugging, you know, cream and red meat diets and everything to that to raw veganism and sort of everything in between. But Ray Peat was certainly one of my phases.
Yeah, well, I think it's good because it makes you relatable, right? Like I've maybe not to that extreme, but I've definitely I've been my own lab rat. Let's say that. I'm trying, okay, before I can recommend something, I want to see what my experience of it is, you know, within my own body and my own state.
Totally. So one other aspect to Ray Peat is sugar. He is, and I think he's probably literally the only nutrition guru who has this stance, regardless of side, you know, of all the different sort of diet cults. I'm pretty sure he's alone on this one. which is refined sugar consumption. He is actually an advocate of it and advises people to even like add refined sugar into orange juice or into milk and consume extra sugar with the idea in mind that it's combating stress hormones. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, I'm like, I'm vehemently opposed to that, especially when I say, I was raised on pizza, pasta, and antibiotics. I was such a sugar junkie and have helped so many people heal from sugar addiction. And it is real. I mean, it lights up dopamine in the brain the same way, right? The studies show the same way heroin does. So we can't use the white stuff. It kills the good gut bacteria. It leaches your B vitamins. It leaches your minerals. So that would be a trying to rob Peter to pay Paul type of a situation. Yeah. But using fruit and root, where you're giving something that has the natural, easy to digest fiber that slows the release of glucose to deliver it in a steady way, that's the type of sugar that we're talking about. And it's loaded with these micronutrients that you're deficient in anyway, right? And so it's like, yeah, that's the type of sugar that I'm a fan of and have been since the beginning of my career 15 years ago.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I eat a ton of fruit, and I will also say that purple sweet potatoes are my weakness. I love purple sweet potatoes, and especially, I mean, there's so many good ways to eat them, but especially when you bake them, like you make them into wedges and then you bake them sort of like thick cut fries, but baked instead of fries.
Yeah.
Ooh, and I get a little, I'll get this is one of my secrets I'm releasing now to the world for the first time, but a little bit of honey with some cinnamon as a little bit of dipping sauce for those purple sweet potatoes. Try it. It might sound weird to some of you listening, but
I'll try that. We use raw honey. I love raw honey. Yeah, interesting. Maybe can you put a little mustard in there too? Honey mustard?
Now you're weirding me out. I'm more of a sweet guy than a savory guy.
Okay.
So
Would head towards the mustard, but okay. Thanks for sharing. So people are pumped on that.
So anyway, well, thank you for indulging me in that Ray Peat digression. But back to your 6 pillars. Number 5. What is number 5?
Okay, so going, back to his work about finding the customized nutrient ratio, like that is something I'm interested in and a fan of, because you find the right amount of protein, carbs, and fats for your unique body that you need. Like I said, you can shut off the stress response. And so using real-time feedback, using temperature and using pulse as that marker, instead of running like the 5 labs I would run in private practice, it's using temperature and pulse to see if you're in an inflammatory state or you're not, and if that meal worked for you or if it didn't. And, we know that blood sugar and temperature, there's a correlation, and you can regulate your blood sugar. And there are things like ovulation and temperature and things like that, of outside hot drinks that will influence temperature. So using pulse is a kind of a good backup measure to see, okay, how is this meal working for or against you? Do you need more fat? Do you need more protein? Do you need more carbs? So helping you find that exact ratio. And that has been pretty life-changing for several clients that I've worked with, for when I first started getting, 5 years ago into this work, and mine was from entrepreneurism. That's how I got myself into this state. And that really helped pull me out of it. And subsequently, so many other people with thyroid dysfunction, really. So,
by the way, is it entrepreneurism or entrepreneuritis?
I think it's both, I don't know. Who knows? You're right. Maybe it's minus. It just depends how bad it is. That'll be our next program.
So how does that actually work as far as measuring temperature and pulse? Do you have any sort of practical recommendations on how that plays out?
Yep. Hang on. I'm just going to plug in for a second. How does that play out for measuring your temperature and pulse? Like how?
Yeah, how do you recommend people go about that, or use temperature and pulse to get any sort of useful feedback on what they consumed and whether it was good or bad for them?
So they should check their temperature and their pulse. I would say maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the day, like in the morning and before bed, and then 20 minutes after a meal. Because if your meal worked for you, then your food is thermogenic. It's going to create energy. And if it didn't work for you, you're going to be low. And so you want to be able to check. So you want to be within a range of 97.6 to 98.6. You want to be roughly within that range. 36.5 Celsius to 37 Celsius if you're working on
the metric system.
Yeah, if you're in the metric system. So, and then you want to use your pulse your pulse should really be somewhere between 75 and 80. And so a lot of people, and you know, this is just a testament to exercise, right? It's like when our circulation is better and what the amazing power of exercise can do, the right exercise is we get this thermogenic effect and everything flows and circulation's better. And so it's when you're in this depleted state, circulation isn't so great and you tend to have a low pulse.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Excellent. So as far as the measurement 20 minutes after a meal, what we're looking for is that pulse shouldn't drop too much.
Right.
And that body temperature shouldn't be too low, correct?
Correct. Yeah, correct. But, and I'd recommend you do that for 3 days in a row and kind of write it down and see where you are, because that's going to give you, just from whatever you're eating, change nothing, right? And do that for 3 days and see, okay, am I running chronically low? Yeah, my body's having a hard time getting out of this stress state. My body's having a hard time regulating blood sugar. And so I probably need to make some changes to make it a little bit easier. And you start noticing that. Like, of course, you get cold hands and feet, right? When you have thyroid problems and tend towards constipation. And so you start to have those problems, and that will be reflected also in your temperature and pulse.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you know who Matt Stone is? Have you looked into his work at all?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
What's he all about?
He's actually a friend of mine. I don't agree with pretty much anything he says from a diet perspective. And I'm sure he would say the same about me. He's, I forget what the movement is called, but oh man, it's something like within the sort of obesity related research community and sort of there's a particular movement, and there's one researcher in particular that has led this movement that's sort of it's sort of like a body acceptance movement. The basic gist of it, I'll sum this up, I'll try and sum this up relatively quickly, but the basic gist of it is like people can't lose weight. Like diets fail, it's impossible to lose weight. Anybody who does lose weight is going to gain it back. So you might as well not even attempt to lose weight, because it's a total waste of time, and it will eventually, not only is it a waste of time, but it will actually harm you in the long run. And there's an element of truth in that, which is that, like, if somebody adopts stupid, unsustainable diets in a short-term basis, and they're not really making sustainable lifestyle changes, they just want to go on so-and-so extreme diet for 30 days or 60 days, try and lose the weight, and then they think they're going to be good after that, and they can go back to their old habits. I agree that that's going to be harmful in the long run if you have many cycles of that. But their view is that sort of any attempt to lose weight is a bad idea, and is inevitable that it's going to be counterproductive and ultimately harm your metabolic health, and you'll be fatter in the long run and unhealthier. And you're torturing yourself in the process. So Matt Stone is part of that movement, and that's part of his general message, but he's also he's been heavily influenced by Ray Peat's thinking, and he's also created a sort of his own methodology of eating that revolves specifically around temperature and pulse to some extent, but really body temperature as sort of a key guide to metabolic health. And he actually has written a book called Eat for Heat that is specifically about how to eat in order to keep your body temperature very high. But it's too, and this is the part that I really don't agree with, he's advocating a style of eating that is like diametrically opposed to pretty much all of the nutritional evidence, in the sense that he's advocating for people to consume lots lots of food, like enough food that most people will gain lots of body fat eating the way he's advocating, and lots of processed food. And even, you know, fast food and all kinds of like junk processed food, he has really no problem with.
You're still friends, huh?
And like I said, I have absolutely nothing against the guy. He's a personal friend of mine. I actually love him. He's got a great sense of humor. He's a super nice guy. But as far as I'm concerned, like his dietary methodologies are I think counterproductive. And so anyway, I think certainly you can take anything to an extreme where it's harmful, but this is an example of, I think, just someone who has taken the kind of idea of temperature as an indicator of metabolic health to, like, he's like, you know, eat tons and tons of refined carbs and salt, and that's going to elevate your body temperature. And I think it just gets really counterproductive.
And it does, and sugar does elevate your body temperature. So way to get yourself really sick really fast.
Yeah.
It's not, so to that, okay. So to that end, I have to say, first of all, my whole approach to health throughout my private practice and everything, people come, they want to gain weight, they want to lose weight, they want this, they want that. It's just what's going on in their body and how do we create balance? They can have whatever goals they want, but if we can create balance, the body will heal itself. That's just fundamental health, right? And so without going on too much of a tangent, like a month or so ago, I went to a Women in Science event at the Salk Institute right in La Jolla. And it was an art exhibit. And so it were all these organisms done in art. And it was so cool because they talked about how art and science need each other, right? How science is the subject, is the objective assessment. So science is going to be objective, and then the art is subjective, right? And so it was about that the field of microscopy would not exist. The scientific field of microscopy that has changed human biology since we had it so we could understand these organisms would not exist without art, because of the artist's interpretation from the scientist telling them about it. They could then draw these organisms and they could then create something that they didn't, like, they couldn't build their bridge. Yeah. So you can't just rely on lab work, or you can't just rely on any objective assessment. So temperature and pulse, they're objective assessments, and just like lab work could be, but it ultimately means nothing without the overlay of the individual, right? So we're having them tuning into themselves, often for the first time. And to your point, as you're saying, what about following this person and this diet and that diet? It's about shutting out the rest of the world. It's about shutting out dogma, and it's about tuning into yourself. It's about creating parasympathetic moments, about knowing, does this work for me or not? How's my digestion? How did I sleep? What are my moods? Where's my anxiety? What's triggering me? How did I breathe? Which is our sixth pillar. And so that, by taking that subjective assessment, it will bring, then it was going to bring the objective assessment to life and actually make it mean something. So that's where I would differ from your friend Matt, in one of 100 ways, probably.
Excellent. Love it. So pillar number 6, breath.
And yeah, so the breath is it's the remote control of the brain and the nervous system, and it's so underutilized. So it's breath and it's movement, because a lot of those of us who are in this state, we can't be doing any major detoxes, any major cleansings. We're already depleted. And so if you're going to go do some crazy cleanse, you're probably going to end up getting sicker and then generating more of these stress hormones. But oxygen is the safest and the most gentle detoxifier that we have. And so we're using it to be able to do that, but also obviously you need oxygen, you need thyroid, you need glucose inside the cell to be able to make and burn energy. And so using that combined with using specific movement through yoga, foam rolling, and really just getting out again, walking and moving, that's going to help so much to be transformative. And we have to be able to use the yoga and the foam rolling, because when the hip flexors and the psoas are tight, they call that our junk drawers of emotional storage, and that forces us to just breathe through our chest, and it perpetuates the problem and forces us to stay in our sympathetic nervous system. So again, it's just a holistic approach to opening up the body in a way and being conscious of breathing in we call them parasympathetic moments. Like, so throughout your day, being conscious of breathing, your exhalations, extending them longer than your inhalations, and then also doing, you know, targeted 5-minute exercises twice a day to recode your breathing.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
5-minute breath related exercises.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
Focused. Yeah.
So the last part of this, these are the 6 pillars, but these are really sort of addressing the physical side of health. I know one of the things we talked about in person is you are a big believer in the idea that, and certainly there's lots of science to back you up on this, that emotional health, psychological health, and you could also use the word spiritual aspects of things are also a big factor in our health. So talk to me about what you think is going on there.
Yeah, so the second part of this is, because this is called the Adrenal Recode, and what we really want to do is help people recode in a way that's permanent, in a way that they can live a healthy, completely different life going forward. So you can do the physical healing, but then what happens the next time a major life stressor comes down the pike, which it probably will, because we're all having a human experience, is what are your normal ways of reacting? You know, what is that? Because you have a thought, and that thought leads to an emotion, and that emotion drives your physiological process. It's going to drive the release of cortisol. It's going to drive up, you know, it's going to force the release of adrenaline first and then cortisol. And so how can we start to respond to life instead of reacting to life? And so this entire second part of this is we really start with, it's emotional mastery, so to speak, is recoding, creating new mental emotional patterns and ways of responding. I don't know how much time we have or how much you want me to get into it.
We have like 5 or 10 minutes more. We're a little overtime, but this is good stuff. I'm happy to go a little overtime as long as you have 10
this
minutes.
This is a really long podcast. Yeah, so I'll give you the example and my own, what this to me is the most personal work that I've done in my career in the last, you know, since I started the whole journey 13 years ago. And so, yes, I've done this work. Yes, I know how to balance my neurotransmitters and thyroid and adrenals. And I've pulled myself out from entrepreneuritis before using this whole physical approach. But there was still that constant, it's a constant the way you respond to stress. And so I had a major stressful situation happen, which I filed for divorce when I was 2 months pregnant to escape an abusive situation.
Wow.
That's a pretty intense thing to go through, but you are growing this child and you have all these fears, right? Like, how am I going to keep him safe and me safe from, you know, the abuse? How am I going to be the sole provider? How am I going to go through this stuff alone? You could really go down a rabbit hole, and a lot of people have a lot of things going on that can really take you down a rabbit hole into fear, and you've got to find a way to get in your elevator and press the button and rise above the energy of fear and intimidation so that you don't feel it. And I had more motivation than I've ever had in my life, because it wasn't just about me anymore, what that stress would do to my body. I am a holistic person. I wrote a book on fertility and prenatal health. I was not going to let my son incubate in a body that was filled with stress hormones. And so that's when I started diving in and developing part 2 of the Adrenal Recode. Well, I wasn't developing it for the Adrenal Recode. I was developing it for myself. And now I want to pay it forward and be able to share it. And so that's where that came from. And so we focus on dismantling limiting beliefs. And that's the beginning. That's just one of 4 modules that's within the Adrenal Recode program. Is these are beliefs that we all, I don't know how much you've dove into this, because I know you're so well researched and spent a long time studying psychology, but you know, we do create a set layers of limiting beliefs from age 0 to 7. Like we're egocentric. We have no other way to be as children. And so you develop limiting beliefs. And for me, mine was I have to do everything by myself, right? It's not true. But when thought and belief and life experience combine, you're locked into a way of being. And so that ended up, I kind of attracted this whole situation. I was able to take accountability for bringing that forth, and then to dismantle it and have now more support, more love, more everything that I've always wanted in my life as a result of going through what I went through. And being able to recode. And there's more to that story, but unless you can do this work and then you can really learn to take that accountability, to do the forgiveness work, that's when you can have genuine gratitude for the endless things there are that every one of us has to be grateful for in life. And that's when you can start to really live in your essence and claim your power as a human being that's always been there. It's just kind of removing the layers. And so the Recode is about healing physically and learning how to create this emotional mastery so you don't react out of past fear or triggers. You're responding as your present self to a present situation so you don't end up back there, you know, physically again. And life will happen. So we'll teach you how to integrate and kind of do the dance as life goes on.
Excellent. What is your preferred sort of methodologies around how to accomplish that sort of recoding of limiting beliefs and that sort of thing? Do you have any particular techniques that you favor or anything like that?
Yes, but if we only have a few minutes, I don't know how in
well,
depth.
you can name it if you want, or give like a very brief overview of it. Yeah, I don't expect you to guide us through the technique practically.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and we're working with two women who were life coaches for Tony Robbins for about a decade. And we've teamed up with this process of helping people, first of all, understand what are sample beliefs, and understanding that you have a memorized self and you have a present self. The memorized self, this just is like, we need that because we don't want to be present every time we're driving, or we want to be able to, right, walk and chew gum at the same time. You need a memorized self for those things. But what happens is we lock in this way of behaving from what we observed, and we lock that in as our memorized self, and that's our way of responding and reacting to things. And, you know, unlike you, I was raised in a very reactive household, not a holistic household, not a holistic, you know, and it was that whole Italian, New Jersey, everything's a big deal, that type of a thing, which there's a lot of love there too, but you learn that overreaction is that's just reacting, right? And so everybody has to be able to understand, okay, and then we will work to have them understand what their memorized self is and what are these limiting beliefs. And we just work on the limiting beliefs, one or two, because there's layers, that are going to be the big rocks that aren't going to put them back into this nervous system dysfunction. And we work and we start to examine the beliefs. And I really like the work of Byron Katie. I like the work of Joe Dispenza. I like the work of Bruce Lipton. And we're really starting to examine the beliefs, and we're starting to then dismantle them, starting to question them, start to dismantle them, and kind of like just poke holes in the story so the light can get in, you know? So then we can start to get the truth in there, and then we can start to then revolve the belief. And I'm really grossly oversimplifying it for the sake of time. But you have to also release trapped negative emotions from the body. And that's one big thing that really helped me as I worked privately with a somatic therapist, because emotions are stored in our body, and we have to eliminate toxins. These negative emotions, they are toxins. They need to be released. Just like we have to change our diet, we release them, we replace them with positive emotions, and it's a new way of operating going forward. But just like we have to constantly interrupt that pattern of living off stress hormones through the physiological approach, you have to constantly interrupt the pattern, the tape that's been running in your head for 20, 30, or 40 years. So that's another biochemical shift, but not until you get the physical healing to where you feel calmer and quieter are you going to be open to doing the next level work that's going to really make sure you don't end up back there.
Excellent. I love it. Well, Christa, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I love the nuance and sophistication and critical thinking that you're bringing to a lot of these other ideas that are floating around, and around the diet sort of interwebs. And I really appreciate the perspective that you're sharing, and this paradigm I think is extremely useful and beneficial for people. So you're launching the Adrenal Recode. When are you launching that?
Yeah, so you'll be able to enroll in Adrenal Recode from December 18th through January 6th, and then it goes away because we all go live together and we implement this on January 8th. But I have a free mini course for everyone with action items, so things you can start eating and doing right away, going out on the 11th, and all of that is at theadrenalrecode.com.
Okay, we'll put a link to that on the podcast page for this episode as well, theenergyblueprint.com/Christa, and maybe we'll talk after this podcast episode if you can arrange any sort of discount code for my audience or anything like that we can have sort of a special link there. And we'll put that link on theenergyblueprint.com/Christa. And so you'll have a series of videos, like a free masterclass or masterclass videos that you'll release.
Yeah, and so everything that we talked about today, it's like, okay, here, do these 3 action items today, and then they'll build off of those action items for the rest of the course.
Excellent. So I will release this podcast during that time, so that since there's a very tight window, obviously it wouldn't make sense to release this podcast 2 weeks after this window. I'd have a lot of angry emails from people. So I'll make sure to release it either just before those dates or during that window. And people can get access to the free masterclass. And excellent. Well, Christa, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to do this again with you sometime soon.
Yes, likewise. Thanks for having me, Ari.
Yeah, my pleasure. A quick thing before you go, just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.